My name is Justin Gage, and you're tuned in to the Aquarium Drunkard Transmissions podcast with your host, Jason Woodbury.
There's a place I have known where the trees are overgrown. The air is wild, the river rolls, and when you get there, your mind goes jumping.
Hey, welcome back to Aquarium Drunkard Transmissions. So glad to have you here with us once again. My guest today on the show is Scott Hirsh. You might know his name from the credits of albums by people like William Tyler or H.C. McIntyre or Hiss Golden Messenger. He has long been one of the main contributors to the Hiss Golden Messenger project. But he's also got his own great solo albums. He just put one out called Windless Day. My favorite thing about Scott's albums is really the sense of groove that he establishes. He's a great lyricist, and he's great at melodies and song craft. But man, the grooves, that's where things really settle in. I really, really love what Scott does. You hear it on his Hiss Golden Messenger stuff, and it stretches all the way back. Our conversation focused a lot on his current home of Ojai, but we went back to his Southern California days in the 90s when he played with MC Taylor of Hiss Golden Messenger in Ex Ignota, their hardcore band. You'll hear me mispronounce the name, and he politely corrects me, which I appreciate. But we talk about that. We talk about their weird associations with Jack Johnson. You'll hear it all. But yeah, it was really great to dig in with him to talk about record making and to talk about running his studio Echo Magic there in Ojai, and talk about the sort of lure of the West Coast and the lore of the West Coast. So I hope you enjoy this one. I had a lot of fun with it. Before we head into the talk, I will remind you we're about to wrap our season up. We've got just a few more episodes for you this season before we go into winter hibernation. Doing transmissions has been really so much fun this year. We've had an incredible run of guests. You can check out the archives to verify that I'm not making that up. We have had some great guests and some great talks, and I really appreciate you tuning in and listening. There's no shortage of things you could pay attention to on the internet, no shortage of great podcasts and music talk out there, so I appreciate that you carve out the time to spend with us here on Transmissions, and I'm looking forward to the break, but I'm also looking forward to what we've got in store in 2022. The guest list is looking pretty incredible for that as well. So before we close this season, we'll have a little check-in with Justin Gage and I. We'll do a little old school podcast style ramble before we head into our final interview. But we got a few more episodes before then. So without further ado, let's get into it. Here's me with Scott Hirsh from Echo Magic in Ojai. You're tuned into Aquarium Drunkard Transmissions. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy. Check them out at betterhelp.com/aquariumdrunkard. The best way to think about therapy is through the idea of thinking about maintenance. We get our cars tuned up to prevent bigger issues down the road. We get annual checkups at the doctor and go to the gym to maintain our physical wellness. We do chores regularly to avoid a giant mess of a house and gross bugs. Going to therapy is like this. It's routine maintenance for your mental and emotional wellness, and it helps prevent bigger issues down the line. Going to therapy does not mean something's wrong with you. It means you're investing in yourself to keep your mind healthy. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. Why invest in everything else and not your mind? This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp, and Aquarium Drunkard listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com betterhelp.com/aquarium drunkard. That's betterhelp.com/aquarium drunkard. We thank BetterHelp for sponsoring the show.
To your room at night when you dream, and it glows.
Scott, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today on Aquarium Drunkard Transmissions. What is what's new on your end?
I've been pretty busy. You can see I'm in my studio, but it's all messy because I've been rehearsing for some shows, which I'm very excited about. So I got that going on. I'm leaving town tomorrow morning very early to go up north to produce a record for a friend. I'm very excited about it. So things are moving.
That's
things
awesome.
are happening, and it feels strange, but it feels
The studio looks extremely comfortable.
It's very comfortable. Yeah, thank you.
I'm interested in. I see some guitars. I see a drum set. I think I see some drum machines, which I think this is all.
I did not play. I swear I did not place this. This is just. It's not even usually like this. We were just in here yesterday working on some things, so this is the last stays. And I was like, oh, that looks cool behind me, so I left it. But I didn't stage it.
I believe
promise.
you. I trust you. You seem like a trustworthy guy when I listen to your records. I am curious though. You mentioned you're going someplace else to produce a record. I would imagine you do most of your producing in your space, right? Is it?
I do. Yeah, I like to move around. I love I love all kinds of studios, and anytime I get an opportunity to work in a new one, I jump at it. I can do a lot in here, but as you can see, it's a pretty small space. The place we're going, I don't know how much I can tell you about it, but I will say this: it's like the old studio of a new age guy, Kitaro. You know that guy. So it's his old studio. That's all I know. And this is the maiden voyage. Some other people moved in and took over, and I'm very excited about it. So it's in Occidental, California, and that's all I know. But I mean, anytime I can get a chance to go somewhere like that to record, I'm super pumped. So I'm looking forward to it.
It's such a weird but like coincidental thing that this week I was having an Instagram DM conversation with Dave Schools, and he told me, "Hey,
okay, well, then you must know. Then you know all about it."
So
he's playing bass on the session, so that's amazing.
It was such a trip because we were talking, and he was like, "Yeah, check this out. I'm in the studio, and it's like Kitaro's studio." And one, I have absolutely listened to Kitaro records, like not so much now, but I had a band teacher in high school who was really into Kitaro, and he arranged a Kitaro song for the marching band that I played. And so one, that's my Kitaro reference. But two, Dave Schools was like, yeah, and Scott Hirsch is coming up. And I was like, we're talking for Transmissions. And he was like, small world. And I was like, smaller than I even had any idea,
Yeah. Well, I'm excited. Yeah, that's amazing. I'm excited to work with him because we've crossed paths a lot of times, but we've never like fully worked together. So it's gonna be cool.
He's one of those guys. He's like has such an omnivorous taste in music, and he's so interested in so many different things. Like that's fantastic. And then it's he's part of this like legendary jam thing, and so he's all over the map. But that's rad. We love. He's done a few things for Radio Free Aquarium Drunkard, and we always are like so appreciative. But that's awesome.
Yeah.
So was Windless Day mostly done or all done at home at Echo Magic?
Yeah. Well, I won't say all because there's another. I have a friend Jesse who was sitting at this drum kit yesterday. Jesse Siebenberg, and he has a similar space. There's all these little tiny rooms in town, and so he's like a couple blocks away. And we did some work in his spot too. So he had a broken 8-track, or I call it the 7-track machine. So we recorded a lot of basics there, and then I took him back here and fooled around with him for too long. And yeah.
Well, that's awesome.
So I'd say about 80% of the record was probably made in this room. Besides that,
the record sounds great, and it's got such a good vibe. I was thinking, it's got that feel to me of like a good morning record, you know, sort of like,
cool.
sort of almost like a weekend morning, but I guess it could work on a weekday morning. When do you tend to get into the studio, or is there a time of day where it happens more often than not? Are you a night owl, or are you more of a morning guy? How does it work?
It's funny. I mean, to answer that question, I made a lot of this record at night. And it just sort of, I mean, I hesitate to say this was a pandemic record because a lot of it was written before the pandemic, but a lot of the work on the record was done during the pandemic. And, you know, there's a lot of horrible things, obviously, that come of this time. But
yeah, the
one thing that I have to say I really was inspired by was just more time. Like this sort of open-endedness was helpful. And I have a 8-year-old daughter, and my routine schedule would be to put her to sleep and then come to the studio and work not super late, but pretty late, and then creep in and try not to wake everybody up when I got home. But to answer the first part of the question, and kind of have a mantra about making records, and this doesn't work for every record by any means, but like I definitely try to imagine if anything I'm working on, if it can work, if you can put it on a Saturday or Sunday morning, then it's a good thing. Yeah. And I really think about that a lot. I mean, again, not always appropriate, but most of the stuff I like to work on, I kind of hold it up to that and see if that works. So I'm glad you think that.
Well, I'm torn and going so many directions, but I guess we'll go with the most obvious one. What are a few key records you find yourself reaching for on weekends? Do you have standbys?
Wow. I mean, I see, I know, that's a big question. I mean,
it's a huge question. And every time I ask somebody that, I feel guilty because anytime anybody asks me a question like that, my mind goes completely blank and I don't remember anything I listened to.
Yeah, that's exactly what just happened. I mean, this hasn't been on my record player for a long time, but like one of the ones that just come to mind immediately is always Ram.
Yeah.
The Paul McCartney record. It just always feels like a really morning-y, weekendy record.
Yeah.
I tend to put on a lot of sort of like slower soul music. Just real feel good. It doesn't have to invoke a church per se, but sometimes gospel-y, churchy, soul-y music feels right.
Yeah.
During those times. I just saw something about that Karen Dalton documentary, but that record, the brown one, I'm spacing on the name.
Something is on your mind. No,
Something's on your mind.
In my time is the name of the record. Something is on your mind.
In my time is one I like to put on. I don't know. These are just ones that are coming into my brain right now. It's a tough question. Like, like I was playing a lot of reggae because summertime. That's also good. Yeah.
Well, it's so interesting that you mentioned the way sort of your concept of time sort of. I found that over the weirdness of the last 19 months or whatever it's been, I keep for most of this year I've said for the last year it's been weird, and now I'm realizing how close it is to it being weird for 2 years. I know. But I have been thinking lately about how that sense of time. I'm back at work a lot. I'm in the office. And stuff like that, and it's definitely a big difference, But I have been thinking to myself about how that sense of time being an elastic concept, I find myself really thinking about that a lot too, and going like, why does your understanding of that have to go back to something now? You know what I mean?
Yeah, we blew the door open in a weird way, I think, in the last, like it was 1 year now and now 2 years, right? But
yeah,
I think, and it's funny because I was writing just in my music a lot about time. My last record, it's called Lost Time Behind the Moon. And this just like took it to a whole nother level. But I do think we blew the door off of it. You know, I think people are thinking about their lives differently now. And it's cool, actually.
Yeah. You said a lot of this record was written sort of before the actual like events of the pandemic, but the fact that you were working on it in that time, how did that sense of being a little bit freer in your own time, how do you think that influenced the record, or how did it get into it? How did it manifest when you were actually working on the thing, you know?
Yeah, I think it's it's funny because like it sits in we talked about how it sits in the morning feel and all that stuff, but for me, I see it as a bit of a dark record. I think the artwork reflects it a little bit. And I think I kind of like there is so much darkness, it feels like right now in the world. And I think I kind of leaned into that a little bit. And then also just on a technical level, I had no deadline, you know, it was just like, okay, I'll do this until I'm done, which is sort of what I do anyway, honestly. Like, yeah, I've never not done that. And that's part of why I make my own records in addition to making other people's records, because this is my time to do the things that I can't get on other people's records. So yeah, again, it was just kind of free. It was freeing in that way. And I leaned into it and just let myself paint over things and then paint over those again. It's like, I think of like those oil paintings where there's like some other iteration of the painting underneath, like 10 layers. Like there's definitely that. Yeah. On my records. And it's funny because I don't recommend to anybody else to make records like that. But for me, that's just, I can do it and I have the capacity and I don't have to answer to anybody else. So it's fun. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple times, like that there are rooms like yours around town. You're in Ojai, right?
Yeah.
When did you and your family move out there?
We moved here, let's see, it was about 6 years ago, straight from Brooklyn, New York. It was just time to leave. My daughter was a year and a half old, and I was on the road a lot playing with His Call the Messenger, and we kind of needed a better home base because all our friends had left New York, and my daughter was just like in McGolrick Park, like digging in the dirt. We're like, she just needs to be outside. Like, this is not working. It's just some kids, you know, you just kind of know. And my mother-in-law, my studio it's a back house. There's a lot of these are called granny flats here. It's basically just a standalone cottage. And then her house is directly about, 50, 100 feet in front of this. And we actually moved into this room, the three of us. It was small. Like there's a small kitchen and a tiny bathroom, and we all moved in here, but we were like, this is fine. This is like no different than a New York apartment. And we moved here, and then I left for another basically 2 years on the road. But I knew one person. I knew Michael Jorgensen, and he lives in Ojai, and he was the only person I knew. I was pretty sketched out. I had never not lived in a city for 20 years or all my adult life. Yeah. And it was a little harrowing, but it turned out to be the best move because the creative community here is amazing and we're really happy. So
I know Michael plays on there's some like live versions that I've seen him on. Is he on the record too?
He's not on the record. I don't know why. He played on some other records of mine, but I just never got him in. But we did a fun version of the song Dreamer in here recently, and he played, and it was great.
Yeah,
I've got his I've got his amazing. I don't know if Wurlitzer sitting right there.
Oh wow,
It's
that
red.
that's really
That's a good
pretty. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, but that's cool. So, but I know that like MC Taylor. I know like he's got roots in California. Did you grow up in California as well?
I did. We grew up. Mike and I grew up about 10 minutes away from each other, and we didn't know each other until we went to college together, and we met the first year in college. But we put the pieces together, and we realized that we had been to some similar shows and whatnot. So that was kind of funny.
What are the odds? What kind of shows might you had been at together before knowing each other?
One of them that sticks out in my mind. There was this place called I think it's called the Alternative Mall or the Anti Mall. This is like Orange County. This is like the worst place. But I particularly remember this show by this band. It was like an in-store kind of event that was like, it just was super cool for us in high school to go to. And it was the band Luscious Jackson.
Oh yeah. And
they were on
Grand Royale,
the Beastie Boys label. And I went to that, and then we were like, oh, you were at that? Yeah, I was at that. That was cool. You know, it's probably like 20 people there, and me and him were there, but we didn't know each other.
Wow.
Trying to think of some other ones. There was a lot of, I mean, we were definitely into like some punk rock stuff, some Jawbreaker shows. I think we both attended in and around Orange County. A couple Fire Hose shows, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Was that your gateway more or less into like playing music yourself, or your interest in music? Kind of punkier stuff like that?
I think it came later. I think my gateway, like a lot of kids, came from like classic rock, Led Zeppelin, you know? Mm-hmm. But as time went on, and, you know, I just gravitated towards the edgier things. And at that time, hardcore bands and bands like Jawbreaker and that kind of thing were really the easiest accessible place for us kids in Orange County to tap into, because there was actually a lot of cool stuff happening, but that was like just accessible enough. It wasn't too fringy, but it was like it was a gateway into more. And when we got to college, we found it way more, and we didn't even really know what we were getting into, but we went to UC Santa Barbara, both of us, and little did we know that Goleta it's kind of like the town where the college is. It was a very happening hardcore scene with a couple big labels right then. So
yeah,
we were tapped into something that was very exciting through that.
So is that when the two of you formed Ex Ignota?
Yeah, Ex Ignota.
Ex Ignota. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Not the easy. It doesn't roll off the tongue. Yeah, we formed that. Like Mike didn't even really. We barely played. I played guitar. Mike kind of did, and we were just like, it was a time where you formed bands before you could play the instruments, you know. So,
yeah.
We were just like, you're cool. Like, you're into the same stuff. Let's make a band, and so we did.
That's awesome. But the thing there's something so casual about the way you just described it. But I was like going back and looking through stuff, and like, you guys were an active band. You were playing a lot of shows, yeah. and there were singles, and there's a little mini documentary by Jack Johnson. Like
that's right.
It's such a.
That's right.
It seems like the two of you dove in pretty like.
We did. We got hooked pretty good. I mean, we were in college, and we were just. That's what we were. You just have nothing but time. Speaking of time, besides the
common
the
theme,
few classes, the few classes you got to go to, and this is all pre-internet, right? So there was a magazine that, like a newspaper magazine, and we put an ad in, and we said, hey, we want to play. This band wants to play, and then. In the next 3 weeks, our mailbox was full of letters from all over the country.
Wow.
And kids were like, come play in our living room. And we were like, this is amazing. This is the coolest thing. So we bought a shitty van and we hit the road, and we didn't know what the hell we were doing. But I will say that like that sense of community and experience, like it put the hook right in us. Like I don't think there, like for us right then and now, 25, 30, however long it's been years later, like you can't take that away. Like it's just that it just got us, you know?
Yeah.
And like we can't not play music.
Yeah.
And I know this story isn't unique. Like I think there's so many, I just constantly meet people from the same time and they're like, oh, I was in the house in Ohio that you played. And I mean, it's just a common story because it was just a really like tight knit community and it was very exciting. And a lot of those people have gone on to make really great music outside of that style.
Yeah.
So.
What were the shows like? I mean, how rowdy on like kind of rowdy?
I mean, we were a really loud band, a crazy band and jumping around and I used to play like my guitar with a screwdriver and just weird, fun stuff like that.
That
big
rules.
Marshall cabinets and, but a lot of times, I mean, there's a couple of shows that I remember that, like one town in Texas, I think it was near Houston. We rolled like you never know what you're gonna get. We rolled into town. It was just this cool family and like their extended family. And we were like, okay. And we just played for them and it was amazing. And they passed around a little coffee can and we made a couple dollars. And then we were like, this is so cool. And then we moved on to it's like, it was like some kid's birthday party and like all the like abuelas and like aunts and uncles. And it was just amazing.
That's, yeah, that's amazing. that's so I think about how obviously that band kind of evolved into another group. You guys were in Court and Spark, and then of course His Golden Messenger. I think about how the folk music thing kind of is like obviously a huge part of the Hiss sound, of your sound,
Sure.
But on a real like concrete grassroots sort of level, I mean, what you're describing in those punk days, I mean, that's also a kind of folk music, right? Like a kind of a common...
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that maybe that connection is a little bit under-examined because, I don't know. When you think about it, why isn't Jawbreaker considered classic rock? And then I thought about it, and it's like, well, because all the classic rock is still considered classic rock somehow. You know what I mean? Like, 15-year-old kids are still being told they have to listen to Led Zeppelin, which I don't mind. I like Led Zeppelin, and I especially like Led Zeppelin when I'm 15 years old. But you know what I mean? Right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's true. There's so many parallels in not just punk and hardcore, like any music scene, any style. I mean, but yeah, I'm just thinking about all the artwork and how like there was a common language that you had to kind of like use and abide by if you wanted to like be part of it. And, just like any scene, but definitely it feels particularly folksy in the hardcore scene because there's such a sense of community around it, I think. And people just kind of helping each other and typically out for good causes, like so many food nut bombs benefits and community centers. It wasn't like a straight edge thing, but there just wasn't usually drinking and drugs like allowed, even though people did them and stuff. But it was just more about like not even the music, because the music was terrible. I mean, a lot of the music was terrible, but it didn't matter. It was more just about like having a thing that kids could go do together. Yeah. And I remember parents dropping their kids off. I mean, I was in college by the time I got into this, but like younger kids in the community, like their parents would drop them off, and their parents were cool because they understood that like this was a way for their kids to express themselves safely. And even though like there was a bunch of kids with like mohawks and sketchy clothing, the parents knew that it was like cool and safe, Yeah, that's awesome. So what did it look like as the two of you sort of started to find yourself drifting away from that sound, at least towards different? I mean, how did that sort of start to occur?
I think over time we just got more interested in getting better at our instruments in general. There was we were really started to fall in love with the kind of Midwest Chicago movement of music at the time, like Slint and then later Tortoise and those bands. And there was I can pinpoint it to like a very particular show where we took our gold van and we drove down to LA to, I think, the Troubadour, if I'm not mistaken, to see Tortoise, Sea and Cake, and Five Style was the bill. And it was, we left that show just like, okay,
Yeah.
it's time to learn how to play our instruments now.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was the takeaway. We were like, this is like jazz. Like we were just like, okay, like this is what we gotta learn now. Like it was a big moment. And I don't know, somehow that just got us away from not the ethos of the punk rock thing, but more just the sound of trying to like hone our craft more.
Yeah. Yeah. Were the two of you already pretty wide ranging in your tastes at that point? I imagine that like, you know, especially if you're in a hardcore band and you're driving however long to play a bill with all other hardcore bands, like the van ride, you need to throw some Willie Nelson in or whatever. Like,
exactly.
What kind of stuff, you know, were you guys, you know, tuned into on that level?
Yeah, I don't know why it was, but we were even criticized in our own band at the time for being too artsy in the music we played. So we were bringing in other kinds of influences, and I don't know, we were always really into record buying. And there was some pretty good stores around. There still is a couple like in the local area, but there were so many good ones in LA too, Aaron's Records and in pre Amoeba, there was just a lot of good places where we would haunt and always just looking for, it was like a really fun pastime that Mike and a lot of my roommates and friends all did together as just like what we did on the weekend. We just go find weird records and have these games, like guest DJ, like everybody, you know, bring a record in and put it on. Everybody has to guess what it is. And we just loved music. And so the tastes were wide ranging because we were just digging in the bins, honestly, and finding things that we really liked. And yeah, I mean, again, I'm not trying to say, I don't think this was unique to anybody.
Sure.
You know, we just love music. So we had fun.
How quickly did you take to being the guy who was doing sort of the bulk of the recording or things like that? Was that something that happened in that time, or was that something that developed more as the years went on?
It's something I was always interested in, even prior to being in bands. I remember trying to figure out. Well, I had a 4-track even in high school, and playing around with that, a little tape cassette 4-track, and I would record my friends. And then I remember trying to figure out how to get my old Windows PC to record audio, which was like before there was that I knew of any software to do it. And so I was always kind of the technical guy. Like in our band practices, I would be the one hooking up the PA or something, and always trying to get a weird guitar sound. So it was a pretty natural thing that I got. I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all that I got more into recording. And I never had any super formal training other than making records of our own with other producers and people that I learned from. In college, I studied film, and again, I gravitated. We had to make films, but I gravitated towards the sound part of that too. And that was an experience. That's the Jack connection too, because he was in my class, and he was a great filmmaker and still is a great filmmaker, but he barely played music. So we were like, yeah, it's going to be cool when Jack becomes a famous filmmaker. Yeah. And then we all graduate college, and he just was like, no, I'm going to be a rock star instead.
Yeah. Was he, did you surf too? Cause I know that's part of his thing. Were you in that?
He definitely surfed. We would go to the beach, but people ask me this, I grew up in Southern California in beach towns and Santa Barbara, but my answer is kind of like, well, I didn't really surf, and that's why I played music.
Yeah, sure, sure.
I'm like not that bummed about it, but I'm also like, I love it. I love the beach. Like, I go all the time here. It's only 15 minutes down the road, and I have desires. I've been surfing. I've been learning how to surf a little bit. I try every now and then, and it's great. But I not like Jack. He was an amazing surfer.
Yeah, yeah. That's wild. That's wild. And I know he had done some film. He also did a documentary about, or was part of a documentary. The whole name just slipped by. Conquerors of the Useless, maybe. Anyway, it's a great. I'll probably cut this part out because I forgot the name of the movie and I don't remember exactly what it's about.
That's okay.
But I liked it.
I don't know it. Yeah,
it's like a mountain climbing.
I would love to see more of his film work. I mean, I've seen some of his surf films and they're beautiful.
Yeah.
He really had a great eye. That film that he made is really cool.
It's great. It was really cool and like very impressionistic. And I was kind of blown away how much I could tell it was you guys. You know what I mean? Just like just in the vibes, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But so as that goes, growing up in Southern California, and now you're, farther north. What is to like, let's say, somebody's an outsider. I mean, how does where you grew up compare to where you are now? Does it feel like part of the same world? California feels like a country unto itself, is what I'm trying.
It is. I don't think it's very similar to where we grew up. I mean, it's in Orange County. It's just like a whole other zone.
Yeah.
Even Ohio is like an hour and a half from LA, and it feels pretty removed. The best analogy I can make with Ohio is it's kind of like what upstate is to New York City.
Yeah.
A little bit, and definitely get the traffic from LA coming up here every weekend. It feels that way. It's rural and it's just kind of slow high, we call it.
Yeah. Do you feel like that fits where you're at these days?
Yeah, I've really leaned into it. I mean, I'm a New Yorker by heart. Like, actually, my whole family is from New York. I was born there, even though I grew up in the West Coast. But I lived there for 10 years before moving here, and I'm still trying to get that anxious New York energy out of myself. Living in Ohio, like at a stop sign, like, when people are just like, no, you go. Yeah. There's a lot of that, and it drives me nuts, to be honest. Like, waiting in line. I haven't done a lot of this year, obviously, but waiting in line at the cafe to get your coffee. And I'm just like, come on, people, like, let's go. And just like, you can't be that guy, but I kind of also love secretly to be that guy in this town, and it's okay. It's fun.
Listening to the record, I wouldn't necessarily guess that because although you said there is some darkness in it, and I was thinking about how Spirit True has such a sense of like mystery in it. There's a sense of, you're singing in that song sort of about like waiting for something, and I like that it's very unspecified. You know what I mean? That feeling of stuff. Yeah. So I feel like that mystery gets in there, but at the same time, it does sound to me like there's like a patience to what you do and a patience to the kind of music you make. So it's interesting that maybe internally you're wired a little quicker, or you're geared to go a little bit faster. Well, about New York. So what brought you back to New York? Because you were there for a decade.
I mean, on one hand, I loved going there as a kid, and I have a sense of home there, and I needed to live there at some point, and I was sad to not live there earlier in my life. But the real impetus was that I got into a graduate program to do more technical stuff, and that was just like a way for me to say, okay, I have to go now. Yeah. So I did that. And it was great. It was a fun time.
What did you have like studios that you'd work in out there as well?
A couple. I had a job doing voiceover recording in just like it wasn't really a music studio, so I was in a recording studio almost every day. But there were a couple spots I haunted, and then I had my own spot for a little while, where Mike and I made one of the early His Call to Messenger records. That's the building is it's not there. I think it got either knocked down or turned into fancy condos, of course, as the story goes.
Yeah.
But that was in Dumbo, Brooklyn, and that was a pretty creative space I had there.
That's awesome. So did you find what was happening in your own music at the time that you moved to New York, and how did the move affect it?
In my own music, for the most of the time I was in New York, I wasn't making my own music.
Yeah.
I was working with Hirsh and other people. And I started my very first record right at the tail end of New York, and I finished it in Ohio. So
Yeah.
that was a big transition in my life. Actually, it was like moving to California, and the move to California kind of coincided with me not playing with Hiss, like in the live touring and all that stuff too. So it was just a big kind of moment right then.
Yeah. You mentioned that, you know, you moved to Ojai and then you were on the road for a long stretch right after that. What was it that led you to kind of make the call that like you didn't necessarily want to be on the road all the time? Was it family stuff? Was it a combination of things?
Yeah, it was all of that. It was definitely wanting to be around my daughter growing up, which, you know, obviously Mike has kids too, and he was on the road even more after that. But you know, it's very different when it's your project, you know. So
Yeah.
you know, I was definitely Hiss is very close to me, and you know, it's the love. It's one of the loves of my life, but it's not my project. And for me to be gone for that long, and when I wanted to do so much other things, it started making a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I could continue to work in the studio with Mike, and that's been amazing. So
yeah. So your own stuff started to really come at the end of that part of your story, and then bloom more when you've been out there in Ojai. What have you found? How has having your own outlet sort of affected or changed your relationship with music? Has it?
Absolutely. Like I said earlier, for me to make solo records is, I think it might come from a slightly different place than some other folks that make solo records. I mean, one of the things that I get to do when I make them is kind of riff on some ideas and some styles that I have gurgling around in there that I haven't been able to put in other places. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like it's an emptying of I don't want to say the trash, but kind of. I mean, it's an emptying of ideas that I get to jam on my own without having to cater or fulfill like another artist's thoughts, you know, and that's really fun for me.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what it's all about. That's why I make records. And the touring part, like I love playing live. I love being on the road. And I'm hoping to do more of it. This year got, you know, everything's crazy, but that also is an extension of like getting to go out and then and meet more people that I could potentially even have creative endeavors with too. So it's all just sort of like this. I think it might come from a slightly different desire or place than some other solo artists. And I don't. It's not treated any differently really out in the world, but
Yeah.
in my mind, that's how it works.
One of the things I like so much about your records, and especially this new one, is I mean, obviously you pull and incorporate a lot of sounds from, like, you know, traditions in a way. You know what I mean? Like I hear, obviously there's a J.J. Cale, you know, influence. There's a Faces influence, Van Morrison, some Lou Reedy moments, you know. But then there's also a willingness to bring things from other parts of the musical spectrum. dub music, ambient stuff. I know you've worked a lot with William Tyler too, and that's something that I also find so gratifying about the music that William makes, and for that matter, his Golden Messenger, like there's these little sprinklings of different things that you bring something to the table that kind of removes it just from the singer-songwriter acoustic sort of framework.
Yeah.
Do you find that people are, do you feel like where does that sort of desire to bring elements in come from? I mean, does it just come from being a record dude who just like is in love with a lot of sounds?
I'm not afraid to wear influences right out front. I mean, I don't get, I obviously get a lot of JJ Cale. I love JJ Cale. I really do. He's one of when I heard Naturally Troubadour the first time, it changed it just like totally changed my perception of music. So I love, and I don't feel, some people get mad when you get comparisons all the time, and
sure.
I never feel that way. I'm like, awesome. I love all that, and I'm not afraid to like put it into my records. To me, it's just, again, kind of going back to the earlier conversation about folk music. It's my way of celebrating these artists that I love with everybody else. And the cool thing about it is that, like I've got the catalog of JJ Cale in my record collection, which I bought for $1 or something, but they're harder to find now.
Yeah.
And there might be a 20-something-year-old kid who doesn't know JJ Cale, but heard my song and then read that it sounds like that and then found a JJ Cale record. And like, if I'm the conduit to that, I'm stoked. That's really exciting to me. Yeah. So I just like celebrating the music. And so, if I can, and I make records that way, I'm just like, oh, this could have this feel. Like I could take an Al Jackson drum feel and I could marry it with and I just reference all of these records in my head, and that's so fun. And then I make the music that way. So, yeah, it's a celebration.
Do you find that by doing that, right, like by sort of saying like, I'm going to take this and I'm going to take a little of this, and then you kind of, do you find that by pushing it sort of through the filter of just simply who you are and the way you play and all that stuff, that it, at least when you're experiencing it, it kind of just becomes its own thing that's not necessarily...
I like to think so. I like to think so. It's funny because I've made 3 full-length records of my own now, and as much as I think they're different from one another, like I know that they all kind of have like a pretty focused sound, and that's me. That's my stuff coming through, and that's the cool part that I don't have to try to control because it just shows up there. Yeah, I think so. That's also the fun part is doing all those things and finding all these influences and then just making it my own by not even trying, right? Just by letting it happen.
Right. So when you're working on stuff, what are the things that, like, I know that nobody wants to try for anything, but when you are working on things, are there sort of like things that you feel like it's important to sort of make sure the records have something? I hear like you seem to prize like a really good groove in a lot of your work, and like that seems to sort of be like and I mean that more than just saying like this is like cool to jam to, you know what I mean?
You're right. Yeah, rhythm is always of the utmost importance. Yeah. Absolutely. And I know Mike feels that way too. We've been on that path and that like agenda for many years, and it just that's got to be first. The rhythm and the bass and that feel, that's very important. So that I think that I know a lot of people hold that important, but that's definitely in there. What else were you asking about?
What is it that you feel like you got to make sure the songs have before you feel satisfied with them or happy or living within them? You know what I mean?
A couple of things. I mean, on this record in particular, I focused. This is another part of like just having more time, but I really like. I really worked on the songwriting more than I have, and just taking pride in the actual writing. You know, aside from all the production stuff, which obviously I'm going to obsessed over.
Sure.
I really wanted there to be good core foundational songs here. Even more so than in past records. And then the other part of that answer is, I like to think, and I always have conceptually about making records, like not that I make full on concept records, but I really do map out the song order and the sides and the flow of the record very, very early. It's not an afterthought, and I write to that as well. So, I find that the vinyl format is the perfect attention span for listening to music. So you have 2 20-minute sides or less, a little bit less. And that's like, I just think that like civilization hit a real pinnacle with that like time frame.
I agree.
And so I love it. And it's just like, it's a puzzle piece, but I like to write into it and I'll craft the record thinking about that from the beginning, which is very satisfying when it works.
Yeah. And when it doesn't work, do you have moments where you have to eject songs, or do you feel like this one's just not gonna fit the, you know? I mean, have you ever had those arguments with yourself? I'm sure you have.
Totally, yeah. I mean, actually, it's funny you were talking about Spirit True, because I didn't have a first song. Oh. And I had to write a first song, and that's what I wrote.
I wrote in my notes, this is not me bullshitting. I'm reading direct out the page. It says, Spirit True is such a good opener.
Wow.
But I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, it is a good opener. It was written as a good opener, and it is, you know. But that's
yeah, it's on purpose. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I needed a first song. It was like, usually I feel like I've never had that issue before on my other records. Like I had the first song, no problem. Sure. I had everything else, and I was like, "There's no first song," and I had to write it, and which was challenging, kind of. But I had a couple of those riffs, and I had a few things, and it needed to feel right, and that part was helpful. So.
Well, it absolutely rules, and it's such a good. I mean, the record has such a great feel, and I've really enjoyed spending time with it, and with all your stuff, and I really feel like, what you've got going on up there is pretty great. Have you been able to host folks over the pandemic to come up and do some work? I mean, are you still kind of keeping busy with collaborations and stuff?
Yeah, we haven't done a ton of hosting, but this is the first record that we're putting out we have a kind of loose collective. It's about 4 people big, called Echo Magic. Yeah. And we are, I guess you could call us like a production team, but now we're also a record label. So, it was something that I personally resisted for a really long time, being a record label, but at a certain point it was just like, wait, this totally makes sense. We should just also be a record label. So
it's that punk DIY thing back in the mix, man.
Again, it's no joke. I actually have a bunch of t-shirts coming to my garage and a bunch of records that I'm going to be personally mailing out, all that stuff. It's like, it takes me right back to those days, and it's awesome.
Your band could be your life. Yeah,
exactly. So we have a lot of just stuff of our own. We didn't have to host a lot of people. I mean, I've done a lot of remote work. I mean, I mixed the last Hirsch record. I was supposed to go record, but that was like right in the heart of lockdown, and I didn't end up going to Durham to record. I just kind of, you know, they're fully equipped to do all the things, and you know, we had a lot of conversation, a lot of talking about how to record it, and I got to mix it. But that, you know, I've done so much remote work in that way, a lot of mixing, which I love mixing.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say is we've had a lot of internal. We have some stuff brewing here, doing final mixes of a band that's in our little sphere from Ojai, from other places, but they all actually congregated here in the pandemic and now are here. And that's really cool. This band called Song Preservation Society, which I'm very excited about. We've got a friend, Mia Dyson, who is Australian, but she's part of our orbit, and we do a lot of work with her. We're making a new record with her. So we've had a lot of like internal busyness, which is really exciting, and kind of growing that stuff. And it's just been fortuitous that we all are here right now and have time. So
that's awesome. Well, it seems like time has just been the theme of our conversation, and it's been really, really good spending time with you. Thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me about your work, dude.
Thank you, Jason.
One of these days, spirit true, I know I'm gonna know you. The endless road I've been down.
Scott Hirsch here on Transmissions. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Jason Woodbury. I write, host, and produce the program. Andrew Horton edits our audio. Sarah Goldstein and Jonathan Mark Walls create visual assets for the podcast, and our executive producer and Aquarium Drunkard founder is Justin Gage. He's the top of the show announcer, and you can hear him every Wednesday night on Sirius XM, 7 p.m. California time, for the long-running classic radio program, The Aquarium Drunkard Show. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, we're about to wrap our current season up. So if you have been enjoying Transmissions, do me a favor, leave us a rating or a review wherever you listen to the podcast. Go ahead and click 5 stars. If you need to click less stars and provide some constructive criticism, that's of course cool too. If you want to take your support a step further, we're over on Patreon, and we upload all sorts of cool bonus audio content for you over there. Help us keep the servers humming and help us keep making this independent podcast. We appreciate your support very, very much. Next week on the show, we've got Roberto Carlos Lang, better known as Hilaldo Negro. We're going to talk about his great new record, Far In, and get kind of far out. So we'll catch you next week. Until then, stay safe. Keep yourself well. And thanks so much for tuning into Aquarium Drunkard Transmissions. Back soon.